Yeah, that was weird. Somehow the stream froze.
I
now
want to. I almost want to just keep you up there frozen, but I won't. I remove you.
From another life.
So ridiculous.
How's
Internet
your
issues.
Technology. When is it ever going to be okay? It is much better, but I hope we don't get frozen again because that was weird. Very
We
strange.
could
It's
just keep
never
it
good to
going
see
and
a
have all the
frozen face.
frozen versions of you. Hey, everybody. I'm Kyle. I'm joined here today with Bookborn, who I've done discussions with Dandelion Dynasty with before. We have our Speaking Bones discussion, which is available on her channel right now. And we are joined today with the wonderful, the amazing Ken Liu, who just finished his Dandelion Dynasty series with Speaking Bones that just came out on June 21st. Ken, how does it feel to have the series finally finished?
Where do I even start? But thank you first, Kyle and Bookborn. I don't know how to describe it to you. I mean, you do something for 10 years and that's all you do. Your agent has only sold one thing for you in 10 years and you've been working on that thing for all that time. And then finally it's gone. It's out. I think you feel happy, but I think you also feel a little bit lost because now I don't know what to do with myself. Yeah, like that.
That makes sense. You devoted a lot of time to it.
I did. I mean, it really has been the vast majority of my where my creative energy went for the last 10 years plus at this point. So yeah, it feels kind of amazing. I mean, when I was writing the series, I often told people that I felt like one of those workers trying to carve the great Sphinx or something like that. You only see the one square meter around you as you're working on it. And you chip away for 10 years. And then finally you can sort of walk away and look at the thing that you made. Not until this moment can you actually see what you did. It's a pretty cool feeling.
Are you going to miss Dara? Because as a reader, I close the book and you get a little sense of sadness when you've been with characters for decades. I do get that kind of profound sadness, like, well, I'm saying goodbye to friends and a place I can't revisit. As a writer, do you feel the same way about your places and characters?
I'm not sure I feel the exact same way. Because for me, I'm always going to be in Dara, if you will, right? I mean, I'm not writing the series anymore, but I have no doubt that all the characters are still there. They're still going to do their own stuff. The way I ended Speaking Bones is, of course, there is an ending. The whole arc comes to an end, but it's also hinted at in the very last chapter that the revolutions never stop, that there will always be changes, that every time you think you've solved one problem, you see that there are more problems that still need to be worked on. And the very end is not a period, but rather a question mark. It says, a new chapter has started for these people. What's going to happen? And so for me, I haven't really left Dara. I think I will always be there in some sense. Dara will be there, and I think about from time to time what my characters would do. So there's this phenomenon where when there's a long-going TV show or something, you end up realizing that there's an episode or an appropriate reference for every situation in life. There's always a Simpsons episode that will be on topic. There's always an Office episode or a Friends episode or something that will be on topic, whatever it is you're dealing with. For me, as the creator, it's kind of funny that Dara sometimes feel like that to me whenever I'm dealing with something or I'm reading a newspaper article and I'm like, oh, this reminds me of the time this happened. Or I'll be like, oh, this is a problem that, they'll enjoy solving over there in the Dandelion Court. So for me, I'm never going to leave Dara. It will always be with me because I spend so much of my life in it. I feel like I have lived a lifetime there, and it will always be with me as a result, even if I'm not going to write any more books in it.
That sounds amazing. I'm going to stop you real quick just so we don't accidentally. You're making me nervous with that one. This is going to be a spoiler discussion, everybody. So if you have not read Speaking Bones, do not
Leave now.
continue reading. I was nervous that Ken was going to say some major spoilers there, but
I won't.
all right. So, real quick before we tell everybody to leave, is there a pitch you want to make for the Dandelion Dynasty? If somebody hasn't read it, what would you say to them?
Okay, if you have never read it before, the simplest way I would describe it is it's an epic fantasy novel in which the heroes are engineers, not wizards. And by engineers, I mean engineers of all sorts. They are engineers who build machines, but there are also engineers who build institutions. And the Dandelion Dynasty is very much about both kinds of engineering, how to craft mechanical solutions to problems, but also how to build better institutions. That's fundamentally it.
I agree. All right, everybody. If you have not read this, come back later when you read it. I absolutely recommend it. I'm sure Bookborn also does. And now we are going to be hitting spoilers. So my first question, Ken, is how dare you do this to us?
Okay, you have to be specific because I do many terrible things.
The first 1,000 pages. How dare you?
We got to a specific point in this book. It is when Thera is going back to the Aegon, and the uncle, I'm blanking on his name, he comes back, and I messaged Bookborn, and I was like, last time we talked to Ken, he said he was a hopeful person, and I'm starting to think he was a liar.
We did. We were like, Ken is a liar. He lied to us. This is terrible. Everything is awful. I'm so upset.
But the ending was hopeful, so you're not a liar. But it took a lot of pain to get there.
Yeah, it was actually something I talked to Kyle about. I am curious because of our last conversation, I had this thought that like most books, around the halfway mark, maybe around like page 500, things would start like swinging up, and it would be all like, everyone's winning and everything I want to happen is happening. And instead it was like, nope. And it wasn't really until like the last 80 pages or so where we get that great scene with the bird, and you have this bird's eye view of what's happening. And you finally, like, catharsis happens. I finally understood what this whole fight was for and what happened. And I'm curious, was it always the plan to wait till that late to have that moment? Or did it just happen? I mean, Kyle and I talked, it was perfect. It worked so well for the story, but it was surprising. Like, I wasn't expecting it. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah. I guess the most honest answer will be yes and no. No, because I'm one of those exploratory writers. I find the shape of the book as I'm writing it. So I think I used this metaphor the last time I spoke to you, but I'm like a sculptor with no definitive plan of what I want to do. I put my hands in the clay and I just sort of play with it until the shape of the thing comes out. So I didn't plan in detail the exact shape of the plot or how the curve is going to go. That emerged organically from the process of writing it, from what was happening to the characters and how they changed their own ideas. I mean, I can honestly say that this book, I was learning what was happening at the same time that the characters were, because in parts of the book, before I got to the very end, I was very much with Firo. I wanted war. I wanted there to be an actual victory. I wanted there to be success. But, in the moment before he could achieve his goals, I, like him, remembered what happened on the eve of the decisive battle in book 1. And why it was that the compassion of Kuni was the reason that he deserved to be emperor. He did not want to fight to the end. He said, those people, they want to live the same as us. And victories really are funerals, and we shouldn't celebrate victories. We shouldn't try to yearn for victory. And there's a moment where Firo also understood finally what his mother meant, in the same way that I finally understood what his mother meant. And so I discovered, along with Firo, that this was not the right course, and something else had to be done. So I can't say that, I plan everything. In some ways, I discover what the right course was in the same manner as my characters did, which is to just listen to the counsel of my characters and feel what their soul really wanted to do. They all wanted to walk their own path. They were, in a real sense, the heroes of their own stories, and I had to actually listen to that. But in another sense, it was planned because, as I also probably mentioned to you, I had in mind the final scene, which is this bird's eye or dandelion seed's eye view of what's happening to Dara. I had a vision of that scene during or even before I started drafting The Grace of Kings at the beginning. So even before I wrote the first book, I had an idea that this is the final scene I wanted to end on. I wanted to end on this moment of how an entire society had been transformed. Because, to just sort of summarize it, the Dandelion Dynasty ultimately is a book about the emergence of modernity from a pre-modern past. So The Grace of Kings is about the last hurrah of a pre-modern society. It was the moment before modernity came to Dara. And the other three books are just about this very painful process of birthing a modern society out of a pre-modern one. And it's about the sense of scientific knowledge, the sense of the universe being knowable. It's this retreat of the gods from human affairs. So over the course of the books, the gods become less and less important. And in fact, the gods say that we are retreating into the laws of nature. That's intentional. This is about the emergence of modernity from a pre-modern society. And so it ultimately has to be about the main character of the Dandelion Dynasty really is the people of Dara. That's fundamentally the main character. And so the entire book has to sort of chronicle their transformation and then how they became a different society from their past. So I had in my vision this final scene from the very beginning of how things would be changed, how the entire landscape and society and institution and everything about Dara would be transformed, and you would have to, as a reader, feel that change. That was the task of the some 3,000 plus pages that I ended up writing. That's the task. That was the journey. So in that sense, I did want you to really understand what this is about only at the last moment, only at the very end, in the same way that you don't really understand what Empress Jia was trying to do. In fact, I think readers, in some way, I intended readers to hate her, to not understand her until the very end, because that was her point. Her point was that, she was doing something that was incredibly important to me, but incredibly rare to see portrayed, which is a character who really, really does, in fact, have the best interests of the people at heart and believes that she is doing the right thing throughout and tries very hard to do it. And she is willing to sacrifice her own reputation for that purpose, which is not something that a lot of fantasy characters are willing to do. A lot of heroes or villains are willing to claim that they're trying to do the right thing, but they don't really sacrifice everything in the way that she does because she believed it. And that was important to me. Her story is the story that in some ways is most important to me because she's the closest character to the idea of what I call the soul of modernity, which is at the same time deeply compassionate and also deeply callous, because modernity is very much about the sense of, in order to be kind, we have to be cruel. And I want to explore what that actually meant in practice when it's embodied in a person.
I think you succeeded on Gia because I think That's the thing. Kyle and I, well, we discussed the most, right? Wouldn't you say Kyle and I are reading?
Not only did we discuss it the most, I have now become a little bit of a poster boy for this series. And so almost every day somebody messages me being like, what is Gia up to?
I know. People
And-
message me that too.
Yeah. And
all
I'm
the
like, I
time.
don't know. What do you think she's up to? And it's so interesting, you know, seeing people finish like Grace of Kings and they're like, I love Gia. She's amazing. And then they finish Wall of Storms and they're like, I hate Gia. And then in the third book, they're like, what's she
What's
doing?
she doing?
And yeah, it's just like it goes through such an evolution.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
do you think Gia is a hero? So, the way you talk, do you believe Gia is the hero or a hero?
You mean me personally?
Yeah, you personally.
It's really hard because it's sort of like asking, what would be like an equivalent in our society? You know how we speak about somebody like Alexander the Great, right? Is Alexander the Great actually great? Is he a hero or is he a villain? I don't know if we have an answer for that. I don't know. I mean, you know, Cooney and Mata say that, you know, the judgment of history, you know, may not be settled for 100 years. I would say that the judgment of history may not be settled for 1,000 years or 2,000 years. And Gia is like that, in the same way that we don't know if Alexander the Great is really great. We don't really know if Peter the Great is really great, because you can make arguments in both directions. I think it's the same thing with somebody like Gia. I think she would, no doubt, in our society be called Gia the Great, without a doubt. And whether she is a hero or a villain, will depend entirely on your perspective. The people who criticize her will say she easily could have accomplished all of those things that she wanted without resorting to those methods, that you could have done all of those things without the sacrifices that were made. But I think the counter arguments can also be made, which is that the world is what it is. And in fact, the world is as good as it is because of Gia. Without her, it would have been far, far worse. She believed to the very end that she was doing the right thing. And I don't know. I have to say, even I change my mind sometimes on exactly whether what she did was required or not.
That's very refreshing to hear because that's exactly how I feel about her. I go back and forth. Bookborn and I kind of each got a separate part of her plan right, which is that Bookborn got kind of the micro version of like what her actual plan was, like with the seeds and everything, and I didn't catch on to that at all. But I was in my head really thinking about the dynastic cycle in China and how, you know, the rebellions always continue redoing this because everybody has these like governors that just get corrupt, and how Gia had the foresight to notice that this is what continuously happens and how to get past that. And as you say, get into modernity. And so I knew even from Wall of Storms, that's where she was going with it, but I didn't know how.
Mm-hmm.
And so when she finally achieved that, I had very mixed feelings because, man, she did some horrible stuff.
Well, Gia is trying to establish what we would consider a constitutional monarchy. That's what she ultimately was about. She was trying to essentially go through the process of enacting the Magna Carta and the Glorious Revolution. I mean, obviously, that's why the Bloodless Revolution is an explicit reference to the Glorious Revolution and all of these things. So the society that I had in mind for as a model for Gia's actions is really the modern constitutional monarchies, mainly the UK as a model. And the UK is a good place to sort of start with because, as I mentioned to all of you as well, as a lawyer, you know, my concern is about constitutions and the emergence of constitutions. Gia's primary concern is about establishing a constitution, right? The characters in the book who have been taught by her all say the same sort of thing, which is, you know, as early founding members of a society, our actions have undue weight. They're constitutive acts, and they are weighty as precedent. This is a very Anglo-American view of things, which is that in the Anglo-American tradition, we view precedent, the common law, this idea of a body of practice, as the most legitimate way to build a constitution. I mean, the American Constitution being a piece of paper is actually not the original idea of a constitution. It's really the idea of a set of practices, unwritten, but set of stories and practices we all obey and follow and recognize as our constitution in the way that the UK traditionally deals with it. So that's what Gia is trying to do, and later on, Farah, as her successor, understands the same thing, that as early founding members, we're constitutive agents. Our actions will become the model for all who come after us. This is, very much, I think, influenced by the way the American story is often told. In America, right, we often have this worshipful attitude towards our founding fathers and founding mothers. We believe that the founding generation and their practices are constitutive acts alongside our Constitution. The way they did things would end up becoming the model for everyone to follow. George Washington served 2 terms, so the precedent was set. Everybody who come after would also do that. I think Americans don't think as much about the degree to which our constitutions really also unwritten, largely unwritten, and largely a set of practices that are set as precedent. So the Dandelion Dynasty is very much about what that's like, and what is it like from the founding generation's perspective. Gia's, I think the thing that I admire the most about Gia is she had this wonderful self-awareness in a way that I think is probably unrealistic in real life. She said, look, I did all of these terrible things so that all the darkness can be inside me, so that I can shield the institutions of Dara from my own sins. And then at the very end, she says, I recognize that there's a problem here, which is I have been working so hard to try to build an institution that will last. A good king is not enough. You have to have good institutions that will last beyond any king. But in the process of doing so, I have given myself so much power that I have become a tyrant. How do I remove myself and make myself into an example to really give the institution the power it needs? How do I start a revolution against myself so that the body politic will be inoculated against someone like me? I mean, that is, to me, an incredible amount of foresight and self-awareness and just deep planning that I wish politicians had. Maybe some do, but I would venture to say most do not have that kind of vision. And she carried it out, and it almost worked. But I think, to me, the interesting thing is, in the end, it still turns out that that kind of plotting doesn't work, because her secret was found out, and as Kogo says, it's a great plan, but it's still a lie, and the truth is always going to be better than a lie. You can become an example, but not in the way you thought. Submit to the judgment of history and let the people figure it out. And that was really my true message at the end. The people will always figure it out, and the wisdom of the people will always be better than intricate plans and plots by politicians, no matter how well-meaning.
Yeah, that conversation between Kogo and Gia at the end is like, it just clicks so many things into place between like what I felt your intentions were and how Gia saw everything and stuff. It was a very, very great chapter.
Thank you.
Switching gears just a little bit, you mentioned earlier that you kind of just sculpt out a process and you don't really know where you're going. So when you set out to when you finished The Wall of Storms, you were going to write one book, and clearly things got quite big. So there was a lot of additions and things that changed during the process. What storyline was the hardest for you to kind of wrangle into place, and what changed the most from your original vision?
Yeah, let me tell you how this book came to be written, and it's really quite a story. So, as I told you, I don't outline, so I use my drafts essentially as outlines to figure it out. So the first draft of the book that would eventually become The Veiled Throne and Speaking Bones. So this thing, right? This thing was originally one book. The first draft of this thing was about 180,000 words, very tiny. This thing actually is I don't even remember how big. Was it 600,000? Something like that. But anyway, the first draft of this thing was about 180. And that was a very, very different story. I mean, the Blossom Gang don't appear in it. They weren't even characters. I know. It seems insane to think that they're not there, but they weren't. So that was the first draft. And I was not satisfied with it because I felt like nothing really quite clicked for me. It felt to me like it's another one of the story didn't work for me because I felt like the characters weren't behaving true to themselves. It felt like I was trying to make the story happen without the characters really having a lot of say in it. So when I was doing the revisions, I went through and I tried to just sort of feel out again what the characters would actually do. And that's when a lot of things just changed. Thera's storyline was basically entirely abandoned and had to be redone from scratch because in the original, she easily succeeded. It didn't really, there was no, all the heartache and all the terrible things that happened to her didn't happen. She just sort of succeeded and did what she wanted to do. And I realized that was actually not the right thing. It wasn't true to the people that she was with, and it wasn't true to her own character. And Firo's story too. Zankara wasn't there. He was not. He was just by himself. He didn't have someone he loved. And as I was revising it, all these characters came in. All the characters that I ended up loving the most came in, and they demanded to be on the page and to have their own story. Zankara came to me, and she ended up being probably my favorite minor character in the whole saga. I mean, her screen time or page time is minuscule. I mean, she shows up in maybe, I don't know, 80 pages at the most out of the thousands of pages I wrote, but I feel a lot for her. I think she's one of the most endearing characters to me. And the Blossom Gang, they showed up and they demanded 40,000 words just to introduce themselves. That's what that whole cooking competition was about. That showed up in the middle of the book. I mean, if you read the whole thing as one narrative,
right, yeah.
The cooking competition is basically where the midpoint of the book would be. And it's where these people are introduced. It's the turning point. Their introduction starts off this whole new revolution in the affairs of Dara. They came in and they wanted their own story, and I had to figure out how to get them in. So basically, the second draft was much longer, but still not quite perfect. The part that really, really gave me a huge amount of trouble was Firo's storyline. I couldn't figure out how to get him to reconcile with Jia. I really wanted them to reconcile. I really wanted to. I wanted Firo to be the emperor that he deserved to be. But in the end, my judgment of him is basically what Farah said, which was he is in some ways too black and white. He is too much of a Henry V for this universe. He is too much of someone who loved passionately and hated unreservedly. He is just all black and white. And maybe given enough time, he would have developed nuances and figured out that there's more to life than this incredibly strong stance for what's good and what's evil, and this charismatic sort of appeal to people's highest ideals as well as emotions. But there just wasn't enough time in the world we live in. There wasn't enough time for him to really grow and develop, and that's the greatest tragedy of all. And I felt that was the only way to resolve it. So I decided to give up on the effort to try to reconcile him to Jia and allowed him to go out the way he wanted to, which is to do so romantically, heroically, and epically. It's what he wanted, and it's what he deserved.
One of the quotes that I have, it's maybe my favorite quote in the book, is directly related to that, which is, he lived up to the story he wanted others to tell about himself, or tell about him, instead of a story that was true to his soul. And that was so powerful when Farah said that. And even Zenkara, she was the first character that made me tear up in this book. I teared up 3 times. Well, I teared up twice. The very last scene made me cry fully. But when she realizes that like she needs to leave and go back home, and like she's not going to press her claim for her son, that really got to me. And like for you to introduce a character very, very late in the story and develop that level of empathy for her and for Pharaoh, I just thought was incredible. I really liked that character.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad. Like I said, Zenkara really is very interesting to me. She is in some ways, a microcosmos for all the things I wanted to do with this book, because she is a character in the book who is explicitly dealing with the emergence of modernity, right? She belongs to a generation that has just moved from orality into literacy, and she is trying to deal with this incredible barrage of ideas. She's trying to figure out, how do I modernize my people while figuring out how to take the influences from this much more sophisticated, much more modern society. How do I take these influences and still make them true to my roots? How do I still make my society emerge from this encounter stronger rather than weaker? How do I figure out a way to tell my people's story when I have become used to and seduced in some way by this other modality of thinking and telling stories? How do I be modern without losing who I am? And this is, in fact, the dilemma of most societies around the world in their encounter with the West. This is the story of most societies on that transition, and how they try to figure out how to walk their own path in that encounter. And her story really, really got to me, because it ended up being so much more interesting to me as I delved into it. She made me realize that it's a much more interesting story than I thought at first. And I wish, I had enough time to give her her own book. But that will have to be some other time. She is the hero of her own story, but in the story of the Dandelion Dynasty saga, she is only a minor player.
Just thinking of quotes, when you said that quote, I was going to say one of my favorite quotes from the book, and I wonder if you felt it was a thesis. I felt like it was kind of a thesis for the Dandelion Dynasty, which is when you said, I could look up which one it actually is, I wrote it down, but basically that kings don't get character arcs. Like,
history has no plot.
History has no plot. Kings don't follow character arcs. And that was a really important quote for me to also make sense of what was happening at the time, because I was reading this book expecting, like, well, the bad thing happened and then the good thing happens, and that's the character arc. And I find it very interesting how Dandelion Dynasty really doesn't follow that. It's still satisfying as a story, but it really doesn't. There are people who don't get the catharsis we expect or want. For me, that was Timu. Poor Kyle had to hear me over and over again be like...
Okay, to be fair, I do think Timu got justice, right? I do think he got justice, right? He in the end triumphed in the way that he most wanted, right? He triumphed with his mind.
And it did. I actually told Kyle.
Without a head.
I did tell Kyle that his daughter, the arc of his daughter was extremely important to me, as Timu being an important character to me, because it did her acknowledgement of what her father did and fought for the entire time was really important for me to hear. But it wasn't what I expected, I should say. It wasn't the arc in my head, the happiness that I ultimately wanted.
I really am sorry about that, but I could not figure out a way for him to be true to his soul and still come out alive.
It wasn't going to happen.
No way.
Yeah, this is why I don't write the story, I read it because it needs to happen to me. But I thought that quote, it really was an interesting thing to bring outside the story too, about how as people, I think we try to fit things into meaning, and sometimes things happen that don't have meaning. And so I just, do you feel like that quote maybe was intentional there? Like, was that what you were trying? Yeah,
absolutely. It was meant explicitly to speak to readers, because it's a point that I make all the time in my own So I give these workshops as a futurist to various corporations, entities, governments around the world about how to imagine the future. And one of the most important things I tell people is exactly a variation of that quote, Bookborn. I tell people, look, we have a tendency to treat history as destiny. We have a tendency to narrate ourselves as though we fit a certain pattern. But the reality is we are the heroes of our own stories. And the thing about our own books is that, unlike this book, which is actually written, our own stories are, maybe we're somewhere around here, but all these pages are blank. They are blank. They are not written. You need to go out and craft your own story and live a story that is true to your soul. So don't think that you're confined by patterns of history. Don't think that what's past is destiny. Don't think that just because things were done a certain way in the past and there's a story around it, this is the story you must follow. We write new stories all the time. And you really have to believe that you are the hero of your own journey, and you can craft for yourself a story that you like more. It really is as simple as that. You have to do it. This is something that I think Zomi also told Thera early on when she was complaining about her own fate. I think it was Zomi who said in The Wild Storms to her something to the effect of, you don't like the story that people keep on telling you that you should live. Well, then, write your own story, figure it out. You are luckier than most. And honestly, all of us here are luckier than most humans in history. We have more choices, more resources, more knowledge, more freedom than any generation in the past. We are free to write our own story. We are free to say, this is not the story we want. We are constituted of generations, and we are going to make important, weighty precedents. So yes, your quote is I definitely wanted readers to feel it. There is no character arc written in stone for you. You need to craft your own path.
I hate asking you the questions I was going to ask after you just do this really eloquent response, because my next question is, who is the worst person in Dara, and why is it no to me?
Oh, exactly right. It's Noda. There's no doubt.
I didn't know I could ever be pro flaying a person. Like when they're almost going to flay them alive, and then they're like, "Oh, I guess we have to keep them alive." I'm like, "Do we not want to revisit this option? We sped past this too quickly."
Yeah, I did tell Kyle. I said, I view myself at least as a very peaceful person. I don't usually wish violence on people, and I said something about Speaking Bones has made me start wishing violence on several people in this novel because I just need it to be over. I think a lot what you said about Firo, he has to come to the realization, because I think at that moment too, I was kind of bloodthirsty. Like, come on, you're there, just do it. And so what you said about that was very interesting, that like we all have to go on the journey with him. But
Yes.
No to me. Why don't you tell us about how terrible he is?
I don't even know what to say. I mean, in some ways, writing him was revolting to me too. I mean, I felt like lady, what's her name? After like early on, there was this scene where she was speaking with Noda, and afterwards she wanted to go take a shower because she just felt so dirty just being in his presence. But there are people like that. There are people who are just like that. And they're real. I like to say that everybody is a hero in their own story, and everybody is, there's nobody is a villain in their own story. And I think that's true for Noda too. But what exactly is his story? I mean, how pathological do you have to be to craft a story in which you're the hero of that story? I mean, what is his story? I keep on trying to figure that out. And I got to tell you, trying to figure a story out like that and trying to empathize with a guy like that really messes you up. It's very hard to emerge from this unscathed. And I felt a lot like, what it was like to read about the doctors who worked for the Nazis and the doctors who worked in the Japanese biological experimentation camps, and to sort of see how they justify their own actions, to see how they saw themselves as heroes. You read those things, and then you come out, and you do feel like you want to tear your eyes out, or you want to. I don't know. I mean, I had to do a lot of research like that when I was writing a story called "The Men Who Ended History," which
I was
is
going to
about
say,
war
this is
crimes.
reminding me of The Men Who Ended History. Yeah.
So I had to do that, and when I was working on Noda Me, this is something that readers may find interesting. There are a lot of horrific tortures and horrific war crimes committed in the last book of the Dandelion Dynasty. I just want to make sure people know this. Everything in there that was actually done was based on something historically was actually done. None of them are invented out of whole cloth. All of the horrible things that the Ryukyu engaged in were based on actual historical war practices. And a lot of the sort of things that Noda did were based on real life traders who would serve invaders and serve in this Quisling role of coming up with even more horrific policies. So to write Noda Me, I did base him on a lot of real historical figures who were exactly like that, and you always wonder, what is the story of these people? How sick do you have to be to live like this? How do you do it? And the answer, after reading all these books and all these biographies and all these psych studies and whatnot, is I still don't understand it. I don't understand the degree to which humans can do such terrible things, and I don't understand the degree to which we are simultaneously capable of these horrible things as well as great acts of heroism. Because Vokuferna, who saved the cultural artifacts of Dara from utter destruction, again, he is also based on real historical figures who did exactly things like that. And it's moving to me to realize that as a species we are capable of really incredibly wonderful things, even though we also have individuals like Noda Me. It reminds me of just there's very, very little really to divide the good from the evil, and it really is up to our own choices, because the potential for doing all of these things are within us. We are capable of these great acts of bravery and also great acts of cruelty. It really is a matter of choice, and we can choose to do good or not.
Yeah, and what's interesting too about Noda Me is I talked to Kyle because Kuthenrovo, I'm probably butchering that name, I'm so sorry.
No, you're
But
fine.
Kuthenrovo, I said, in some ways, even though what she did was just horrible, it was an honest horrible, I told Kyle. Like, she was forward about it. I knew exactly what she was doing and why and what she was thinking. Whereas Noda Me was, nobody really knew. Like, he was lying all the time, and people trusted him when they shouldn't trust him. And that made it worse. Like, at least I know if Kuthenrovo shows up at the scene, I know what she's doing. Like, there's
Yes.
no question.
You know exactly why she does what she does. She has one goal in mind. So
Yeah.
you know what she's gonna do.
And no surprises, but Noda Me, it just like every time was just worse than the last. And I never knew what was gonna happen. And I think that made him what made him a good villain, obviously, but also just the most terrible one at the same time, even if other people were doing
the thing is, again, fiction is incapable of expressing the full depravity of people. I mean, Noda Me is just based on historical villains, but there were actual villains who were even worse, if you can believe that. These are literally people who would be willing to sell their own children to the invader in order to gain. I don't know what they think they're gaining, power, something. It's incredible to me that people would do the things they do. But Noda Me was despicable, and writing him was very difficult. I was very glad when I didn't have to deal with him anymore. I'll say that.
You could have done it 400 pages earlier, I thought. Previously, I would have said that Bernard Cornwell wrote the most hateable villains, but I think I have to give you that slot now. So congratulations.
Well, I'm glad that you hate him so much because he really is despicable.
Absolutely.
And yeah, he really is.
Yeah, I feel like you were talking earlier about how you really have to let the characters find their story, and I think that's so evident in so many of the characters and why things feel so real. When I think about my favorite series, it is always series where every character feels like themselves. They're not being propelled by a plot. They are propelled by who they are, and then the plot happens around them, even if it's a really plot heavy series. And all of your minor characters feel like people. Like I was telling Bookborn, when Than Kakoru died, Than had not had really a scene to himself in like 2,000 pages. Like he was the
That's right.
most minor character that you
That's
kind of
right.
still knew who he was. But then when he is going to die in that ship and he's talking about how he's the last of Cooney's friends because he was the one that was able to survive, but he was never the most skilled at anything and that he can't live up to his friends. That was so emotionally impactful in like, 3 paragraphs. And it's because that's exactly what I feel like this person would feel like. And the book's rife with that. When Radia dies, when, Zenkara, as we were talking about, like there's so many characters like that. And I just think that's why this series is so emotionally resonant.
I really wanted to give people the sense that these minor characters are not there for plot convenience, but because they have their own story. It just happens that their stories intersect with the story I'm trying to tell here only in a small part, which is why you only see a little of them. But it doesn't mean that they're heroes in their own stories. Zenkara is the hero of her own grand epic. It just happens that her intersection with the story is so little. You see only a little bit of it. But even in that little bit, I hope you can see the grandness of her struggles and all the problems she had to solve, and how to her, the people of Dara could be simultaneously arrogant and foolish and also endearing. And her view of the people of Dara is a perspective we don't really get to see because the story is largely told from the perspective of those in Dara. So it's really fun to have somebody who is an outsider, but who is not an enemy, who can tell you how, the kind of casual structural racism directed against her, the sort of little minor microaggressions, really, that's what she's talking about, right? She's subjected constantly to microaggressions, and you sort of see all the stuff in a new light because the people of Dara have always been the heroes of the saga, and here you see a different view of it. It's not that Zenkara thinks that they're bad, it's just that to her, she wanted to be a part of the people of Darab, and she just wasn't. They refused to see her that way, and then she had to go figure out her own path. And I found that to be a really moving story too.
That's incredible, Ken. I really liked the sections of the novel so much, but we're kind of running out of time here. So I really wanted to know about the creation and utilization of Grinnefins, which I think are like the coolest fantasy creatures I've heard in so long. And just like each book builds upon the knowledge that the characters and the reader have in such an interesting way.
What's really interesting about the Grinnefins, before you answer, is, one of my friends who I got to read the series, when they first show up, he wasn't sure whether they were mechanical or not. Because you had done so many mechanical things, and he asked me, and he was like, is this real? Am I getting real, like fantasy dragons, or am I seeing like a ship? And I was like, you just have to find out.
Yeah, I like them. I think to me the part that really I found interesting is I based a lot of Grinnefin culture on the culture of the nomadic peoples and their relationship to their animals. It's a very important part of the cultures of the steppes, and it really is true that these animals have their own families, their own lineages, their own culture alongside the culture of the humans, and it's something that a lot of us in modern society sort of take for granted or just sort of are ignorant of. And I wanted to really emphasize that it's not just a one-to-one bond between the rider and the mount. There is actually an entire society, if you will, in these animals, and they were incredibly intelligent and deeply empathetic, and they were. They also ended up having their own heroic journey. The climactic battle in the in Ukugande is a battle where the Gurniphans have their own agency, and they come over and they decide their own destiny. And I wanted to do that because it was important to me to portray all of these sentient creatures as having agency, as having some say in their own path. And I thought it was important that these Gurniphans don't just become, part of someone else's story, tools in someone else's narrative, that they would seize this moment, that Thera and her people's faith in the idea that all those who are given a chance to fight for their own freedom will do so is rewarded. I believe fundamentally that if you give everyone who yearns for freedom a chance to fight, they will seize it, and it is incumbent on all of us to try to maximize that potential for freedom in all creatures. It's the idealist in me speaking, but I wanted that moment to work.
I very much think it did. I messaged her when that scene happened. I was like, yeah.
Yeah, I was feeling good about it too.
It was the first good thing that happened in like 100 pages. Even when Tanvanaki, when her Gurrenifin like flies out into the sea after she dies and then like kind of commits suicide, that was really affecting too. I was like, wow, that's good girl.
And you really got to know that Gurrenifin too. I mean, that's one of the oldest mounts. I mean, you sort of get to see the Gurrenifin really when it was much younger and a much fiercer fighter. And then we all decline.
Yeah, it was definitely Radia for me. Radia, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I say Radia.
Radia, I don't know. That moment with the Gurrenifins, I think, was really powerful as well. I didn't want it to happen. I was like, no, go back. Don't do this. But it was a very powerful moment, I think, of like their commitment to treating their Gurrenifins as living beings, not just something to serve them. So
exactly,
yeah, it was an interesting arc for them, for sure.
Yeah.
I also really like the way you write battle scenes, especially in like the later portion of the series where you have the Grenifins, and the people in Dara have to figure out how they can combat them. And so the way you structure combat is kind of like how I've never seen before, where the reader is kept in the dark, and then you kind of flash back into what the technologies are that's going into each portion of the battle, so you never really know what's going to happen. And like the battle at the end of Wall Storms is like one of my favorite battles in any piece of fiction ever. And then even the one in Speaking Bones is just really good, and it's not even really like a climactic battle. Like it's kind of meaningless overall, like in terms of the scope of a war, but the way it just keeps reversing your expectations was just so rewarding.
My favorite battle to write actually is probably not even a traditional battle at all. It's the Battle of Restaurants, really. That was my epic battle, the one that I enjoyed the most, because it's structured like a war. It's structured like a battle scene, and it was written that way. That's probably my favorite one. So I hope readers enjoyed that one too.
I liked how it like kept building, like they kept introducing new little things into it, similar to the other battles, right? Like, yeah, I guess it was structured just like the other battles.
You flash back just like the other ones. How did they get there? How did they write that or make it?
All right, so we should start wrapping up, but I cannot go this whole time without talking about my favorite character, and I think Bookborn's top couple. I don't know. She's giving me a look like it's not. So she's a Zomi here.
Zomi. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So Zomi was my favorite character in the whole series. I think
top 5, but yeah.
Okay.
For me.
I just loved her, and I enjoyed like the positive aspects of her personality, and like how flawed she was, and how she had to kind of be put in her place multiple times throughout the story, and she had to really grow and learn to evolve to thrive in Dara, but also to try and change it as much as she possibly could. And if you could just speak to Zomi's arc throughout the series, and also explain to me why you had to put her in prison for 300 pages near the end there.
Zomi is oh boy, that one is going to be tough. Zomi is sort of a stand-in for modern intellectuals, right? So Zomi is somebody who I would say who is always extremely idealistic, but who isn't always good about listening to the people she thinks she's helping. I think that's probably her biggest flaw. She's somebody who is so committed to the models in her head of how things ought to be that she neglects to check her models with reality. I think that speaks to actually a lot of people who, like her, come from very humble backgrounds, but then by dint of their own efforts, as well as a lot of good luck, they become part of the ruling elite. And that's, a very interesting experience. I've seen a lot of friends who share that kind of experience. They come from very humble backgrounds, but then with a snap of a finger, they're investment bankers, they're politicians, they go to great colleges, and they end up as part of the ruling elite. And they live in this dual existence where they still think of themselves as powerless, as being able to speak for the people that they come from. But then they don't realize the extent to which they have been acculturated and co-opted by the system into which they become part of. We always think that we're going to be part of a system, become a part of a system in order to change it. But oftentimes what happens is we become part of the system, then we end up changing it only according to its internal logic. We no longer strive to change it in the way that we thought we were going to. So Zomi is an example of somebody like this. Her success was based on success in the imperial examinations. So over and over again, you realize, I did this. I hope people picked up on it. Because she succeeded by coming up through the examinations, even though she was deeply critical of it, she was also invested in it. All her reforms were geared towards reforming it. When she spoke of other scholars, she was contemptuous of them if they did not do as well as she did in the examinations. If you remember, she spoke of the teacher, right? She sort of said, well, she was not very distinguished. She didn't go very far. That sort of dismissive attitude, Gia had to call her on it and said, you can't do that, just because you came up and you even yourself said meritocracy is a lie, but yet you still buy into its assumptions in some degree. But all of us do that, right? Even those of us who critique the Ivy Leagues, who critique the elite institutions, who say, first world dominance is not right. We also consciously or unconsciously fall into the trap of following its own logic and sort of buying into it. So for me, the key to Zomi's arc is at the very end when she says, my teacher was right. My teacher said that, he never wanted politics and he wanted to just go fly a balloon and do his own thing. That's actually kind of what I want to do, but I want to be a teacher, except I'm not going to teach to the examinations anymore. The whole point of this is there has to be a way to succeed outside of the examinations. I keep on reforming the examinations and making people unhappy. Maybe the problem is my focus on that system. Maybe the problem here isn't to make the system function better, but to build room outside of the system for everyone to succeed. And that to me is when she finally achieved, what she was meant to do. She isn't meant to reform the examinations. She isn't meant to just make the system function better. She's meant to see that this is not all there is. There are other ways to succeed. There are other ways for us to become great. There are other ways for people to fulfill their potentials. And when she saw that and she could strive towards it, that made me happy.
Yeah, I loved her arc. And then, right at the end there, you teased us with Thera dying. And then I was like, oh no, they're never reunited. And then right at the very last minute, you reunited them. And I was like, oh, thank you so much. This is what I needed. I needed something like this.
Yes, I needed it too. I was like, I have to have a very happy note on this. This is important to me that the two of them get back together. And so, yeah, it happened.
Yeah, their relationship mirroring Luand and Jin's in the beginning, but then having a very different ending, I think is very important to the overall feeling and arc of their respective stories, for sure.
Yeah, just because you can have many great loves in your life doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with celebrating one great love also at the end. And that's what happened.
Absolutely. And you always like bring back the history of how things are examined throughout the series. Like, when Timu dies, it's kind of when Timu dies, he's rethought about by his daughter as somebody who was a hero in his own way. And then that kind of mirrors when Thera was younger and she was talking about Princess Kikomi, and it's like she was not
Exactly.
really shown to be a hero, but she absolutely was. And just this constant redefining of history and how we process the story of collective identity, I think at the end just really slammed home for me.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I actually left that whole thing, right? I mean, in the very end, I sort of gesture at all the revolutions still to come. I mean, there is the whole examination of the legacy of the Liu conquest. You have these descendants of the Liu saying, wait a minute, we have these statues, these portraits commemorating our ancestors who did these horrible things. At the time, right after the war, it was understandable as a way to preserve stability. But today, do we still want these statues? I mean, this is obviously meant to mirror a lot of our own debates in our own contemporary society about past monuments and what are these things really commemorating. And I wanted to explicitly show that, in this society, these are real problems that people are struggling with. Also, at the same time, there's this other thing that was gestured at, which is, I have that discussion about how the governor Pikyu of Ukyutasa is the very last noble in Dara who have real power, because Dara, as a constitutional monarchy, has essentially removed all nobility from actual political power. They really are just for show, and this is one of the last positions that still has real power. But what's sort of left unsaid is, well, actually there is another one, which is the emperor himself. The emperor is also a hereditary nobility position that actually has real power. But the idea is this is the beginning of a republicanism, a beginning of a push towards even further limiting the constitutional monarchy to restrain the power of the king. So the ultimate vision of Jia, which is a good king is not enough, that's why that comes back and gets referred to again, is a gesture towards the idea that perhaps Dara is on the precipice of a republican revolution. It is ready to become a republic. So it's something interesting for readers to think about, which is why I added those moments at the end.
And I felt like the story really needed that, because if everything was just like, and then they lived happily ever after, it wouldn't really feel very organic. Like the struggle is always continuing, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
We just read about the Dandelion Dynasty portion of it, and now, right? That's I know it's weird. I contemplated a lot about the name of the series as we read it. I was telling Kyle at one point, I was like, "Oh, is everyone going to die?" And that's why it's called Dandelion Dynasty, and it's just over, at the end. I mean, that's not what happened, but it did. It was, we got to see that dynasty and how it changed, and now they're moving into the next one, which, like you said, is still going to have all of these things, but we got to see this picture of a very important time in Dara's history.
That's right.
Yeah, it's just very interesting.
I had a friend that finished Grace of Kings recently, and he was like, wouldn't it be weird if the series ended with just like a dandelion flying over everything? And I was like 200 pages away from that spot, and then I hit it, and I was like, he was right. So
you're like, wait a minute.
How did you know?
So that was a wild guess. It sounds to me like at some point you will maybe want to return to Dara, maybe for some novellas
Short story?
or something.
Yeah.
Zenkara seems like she has some stuff she wants to tell you.
I don't know. I don't know, honestly. I have to say, because I spent so much of my life working on this and I got so immersed in it, it really does feel like one of those cases where I feel like I need a break from Dara to just do other things. I don't know if I ever will return. I mean, in some ways, I feel like I told the one story I wanted to tell about it. and it's the important story. And I feel like somehow it's better to let the other stories that I didn't tell to just be told by the readers. So the analogy I use is this, right? So, there's that whole thing about in Star Wars, right? Han Solo says,
I knew you were going to bring up Star Wars.
10 parsecs or whatever. The story that readers imagine in their heads of what that was like is so much effing better than anything that they could ever make. You know what I mean? That was the reason why it didn't work.
Has Ken channeled me?
Listen,
I
Ken,
rant to Kyle about.
You're
constantly.
coming into the middle of an inside joke, which is that she hates the Solo movie for this exact reason.
I
totally agree with
for that
I'm
very
with you.
reason so many times, and so I'm just like, you channeled my trapped ghost complaining to Kyle about this so much. No, I actually agree with you. I mean, it's hard to leave a spot, but like you said, sometimes the stories we get to envision once the story is over is better.
I really think readers will imagine what Zankara's story and what other, I mean, look, I gesture at the idea of another revolution coming where the Dandelion court will become perhaps something like the British court, truly a figurehead with no more power. Or maybe it will become something like a true republic. Who knows? But what's going to happen and how that transition is going to happen, I feel like having the readers imagine that will be so much more interesting than anything I can write about it. I mean, I'm not going to rule out that I may find another story interesting to write about that I will write about in the in Dara. But I feel like the story I ended up telling took so much out of me. I put everything I wanted to say in it that I feel like I need to step away for a long time before I decide if I ever have more things to say about it.
Yeah, well, I will read whatever else you write. I'm sure Bookborn feels the same. I actually just finished your Star Wars book, and I thought it was really funny that Luke says the universe is knowable. I was like, that's Luanzia. So what are you writing now? Are you gonna do some sci-fi? Or are you doing fiction?
I am working on some short fiction pieces, largely sci-fi. One thing that's coming out very soon is AMC is making a TV show based on a series of my short stories called Pantheon. So the short stories are in the collection The Hidden Girl and Other Stories, and I ended up doing some work for them on that. It's very exciting. It's one of the first adult-oriented animation show done by a major Western studio. So I'm hoping that the show will succeed. I have seen what they've made so far, and it's fantastic. It's very fun. It's about uploaded minds and what it's like to live in the cloud, quote unquote. But it doesn't quite go in the direction you think. So I'm excited about that show. I hope people will enjoy it when it comes out from AMC. Other than that, there's a bunch of media projects I'm working on based on my own short stories, largely, that I consulting and writing for. So that's taking up a lot of time. So I feel like I'm going to be pretty busy just doing stuff like this, working on some short fiction, working on some TV film stuff for a little while before I have the time and bandwidth and recharge myself enough to work on something long. But I think for my next book, I will not do the 1.2 million words or whatever it is, epic fantasy. I think I need a little break. There are some authors who just do epic fantasy after epic fantasy, and I think they're incredible. I am not one of those writers. I carve my own Sphinx. That is enough for me. I do not want to go on to do the Great Pyramid of Giza and all the rest of it. I think I want to do something smaller, something more self-contained, like a standalone novel or something.
Kyle, I was going to say, let him breathe. It isn't even officially out yet while we're recording this.
I just want to know what the plans are. I had several people ask me to ask him, okay? It's the will of the people. So the AMC thing, that sounds super exciting. Is that the 3 like the gods will not be chained, the gods have not died in
Those
vain?
are
Is it that?
those are the most important ones in the cycle. That's right, exactly. But there are a couple of other stories that are being added to the cycle in the same universe. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I could see when I was reading The Hidden Girl that like there was some that seemed like they were in the same universe that like or a different time
Yes.
period. So yeah, that'll be
Yes.
cool. I'll definitely check that out. Bookborn, did you have anything else to add?
I love the Dandelion Dynasty. Me and Kyle both force everyone to read it, and they're all loving it too. We're very grateful you wrote it. I'm gonna miss this star a little bit. It was a great story, and I really love the characters.
Thank you. I'm so grateful that we were able to chat and you guys really connect with the story. I mean, writing the story while I was writing it, I was the only one in Dara, and it was just my story. But now that it's out and readers are connecting with it, it's like 100 times better because now I feel like the place is no longer just in my head. I feel like it's real because readers have visited it and they tell me what they see in it, and they tell me new things they discovered in it that I didn't know about. And that's cool. That's incredibly cool to me that this is actually I mean, this is everything I dreamed of. I mean, if you told 12-year-old me that someday I will get to visit a fantasy land and come back and tell people about it and people will be able to visit it too, that is magic to me. And I'm actually living magic. So that's pretty darn awesome.
Yeah, awesome. I echo everything the Bookborn said. I'm so happy that you wrote this story. I think I will think about it for years to come. I will be telling people about it. I'll be rereading it. And just last question to finish up on a non-Dandelion Dynasty topic. What is the last like really great book that you read? Like what can you recommend to people to read if they finish the Dandelion Dynasty and want something else?
Oh boy, this is going to be somewhat unexpected, I think. But my kids and I are and my wife, we're all reading David Copperfield right now, and it is an incredible book. It's such a great good novel. Dickens has always been praised as the greatest novelist of the 19th century, and I can see why. I've read other things by Dickens before, but when I was much younger, and I have to say, Dickens reads differently when you are an adult versus when you're in middle school or high school or whenever last you read it. Reading Dickens as an adult is a very different experience, and you see and pick up so much more. Dickens himself had a career in the law as a court reporter, so his observations about the law especially are very resonant to me. And I was telling my wife Lisa that it's sort of astonishing to me that many of the observations he makes about the legal system are just as applicable today, and almost 200 years after when he wrote it. So it's weird to me that so many things about our institutions and our nature just don't change. We have the same problems, the same revolutions, the same desire for change, and the same cycles of change, retreat, change, retreat. It reminds me of the Dandelion Dynasty a little bit in that sense. Our yearning for change and for revolution don't always end up putting us in necessarily a better place. So anyway, I strongly recommend it. I think it's also a very modern book in so many ways. This is something else that I didn't realize when I was reading him in my earlier days. Dickens uses a lot of very modern techniques, a lot of very postmodern techniques, I would say, that you don't associate necessarily with the 19th century. So I read some of the stuff some passages, and I'm like, wow, this is really experimental and interesting and very, very moving and thoughtful and clever. So anyway, if you have not touched Dickens in a while or have never touched him, I do recommend that you give him a try. He is very, very interesting and not at all what you might expect based on the film and TV adaptations and what people tell you about him when you were a student. He's very different when you read him just for pleasure.
Yeah, I own like a real big book of Dickens that I've only read A Christmas Story, but for all the audiobook listeners, all of these books are narrated by Richard Armitage, who's fantastic. So go listen to David Copperfield if you don't want to read it. I'm sure that Ken's recommendation will hold up on that one.
It's good. It's such a great novel.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ken. We went a little bit over, but I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you, Bookborn, for joining me today. And everybody, I hope you really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you really enjoyed Speaking Bones. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of the book and what you thought about the discussion. And thank you guys so much for joining me. See you next time.
Thank you very much.